I'd very much like to welcome all of you here this evening, and may I ask that you now please turn off or mute your cell phones. I hope mine doesn't ring. May I tell you, before we start, about a forthcoming event. We have a summer lecture series on the Tuesday the 25th of June at 8 p.m. in this hall, and the lecturer will be Dr. Moti Kadar, whom many of you I'm sure have heard before or seen on television. His lecture will discuss current Middle East geopolitics, and possibly by that time in late June he might be talking about the deal of the century or not, we don't know. So now I have much pleasure in again welcoming Barry Shaw to McDonald's and to thank him for spending some of his precious time with us. I'll now introduce him to give his lecture, and afterwards I'm sure that he will answer your questions. Barry Shaw originates from Manchester. He made Aliyah with his wife and 3 children after competing in the Maccabea Games for Great Britain. They lived on kibbutz for many years until moving to Netanya. Barry served in the IDF in a special artillery unit, seeing service in Gaza and Lebanon. He is International Public Diplomacy Director at the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies, and he was the co-founder of the Netanya Terror Victims Organization. He writes commentary and research articles in strategic Jewish and Christian papers and magazines abroad as well, as in the Jerusalem Post and Jerusalem Report. Barry is hyperactive in inspiring new global recruits to Israel's cause. He has initiated many grassroots and professional groups, offering them methods, facts, and bullet points to help them advocate effectively for Israel. To this end, he has authored several books, including BDS for Idiots, Fighting Hamas, BDS and Anti-Semitism, and Israel Reclaiming the Narrative. Also 1917, From Palestine to the Land of Israel, and his new bestseller, A Tale of Love and Destiny. Barry now lives in Ramat Poleg with his wife Carol. A Tale of Love and Destiny is the passionate saga of a Jewish heroine describing the life and times of Sarah Aahronson. Barry will tell us why he decided to write this book in novel format and not as a biography. He will share anecdotes behind the writing of the book, as well as taking us on an enthralling journey as we follow Sarah from being a strong-headed, attractive young girl into a determined leader, the only female to head a major espionage network in wartime under the noses of the enemy. So now I have much pleasure in introducing Barry Shaw, and I will ask him now, please, to come here and address us. The subject that he will speak about is A Tale of Love, Life and Destiny, and the Love and Destiny. The books are available for sale on the table by the door. They're books either for 60 shekels for one, 100 shekels for two, and 150 shekels for 3. So Barry, I'd like you to come up, please, and address us. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
How's the microphone? Can you hear me okay? Back? Yes? No? Let me know if it's too loud or whatever. Okay. Good. Wait a minute, I need your... Where's your Zaka? It's over here. It works. Yeah, we're all right. Good. Okay.
The next one will be better.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I want to tell you, before we get on to the subject of A Tale of Love and Destiny, my involvement in writing at all and writing books in particular. I started writing because I felt it was important that somebody over here in Israel did as much as he could to get an Israeli message out, to do the work basically like quite a number of other people are doing, because quite frankly the Israeli government doesn't do it. And it started off a long time ago when it seemed to me that we were losing the battle of the narratives against some of our enemies, the pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel, BDS movement and others. In fact, it started off rather than books. I wrote articles and pieces on the social media and in newspapers abroad. And about I suppose 11 years ago, I wrote an article which suddenly went viral on the social media. Because I was getting fed up with the BDS movement in the fairly early stages then, and the hypocrisy and the nonsense of their message. And I wrote an article which was called, "If you're going to boycott Israel, do it properly." I think some of you know what this was about. It was the article where I said, you know, these hypocrites that tell everybody else they should boycott Israel are using all the Israeli high-tech appliances, gadgets and everything. They wouldn't give up themselves, they want everybody else to give up. It's happening right now actually, because I've been involved in something, in a protest, an ongoing protest that we have with FIFA, that's the Football Association, against a guy called Jibril Rajoub. I don't know if you know who he is. He's probably number 2 in the Palestinian Authority, and he's also at the same time the chairman of the Palestine Football Association, the Palestinian Minister of Sport. And he's always trying to get Israel thrown out of FIFA because we're playing on occupied territory and other rubbish. And he wanted to, he's anti-normalization on any accounts with Israel. And he tried to prevent the Atletico Madrid football team coming to Israel to play a Fendry game. We put a protest into FIFA. We also pointed out that this hypocrite who's talking about everybody else should boycott, including football clubs, Israel, is in fact himself, as we speak here, receiving medical treatment in Ichilov Hospital in Tel Aviv. My articles came into books because, as I said, I thought it was important that we have to win the moral high ground in this argument, this verbal battle we've got on. And I wrote the book, Israel Reclaiming the Narrative, where I took a lot of the arguments that, the lies that they were making and correcting it with facts and information, exposing the big lie and its perpetrator. I followed that one up by, it resulted actually from a talk that I gave in Holland at the, to the Jewish community at the Liberal Jewish Center in Amsterdam, which was infiltrated by 3 of the leading members of BDS. And at the end of the conversation, my talk, my part, Q&A, one of them stood up and started haranguing Israel. Now, let him go on for about 6-8 minutes. And what I did then is I told him that he was an anti-Semite, because everything he was accusing Israel of, I'll prove it, that he doesn't love the Palestinians, and secondly, he's an anti-Semite. And I didn't, and you know, it's when I have workshops with students and things like that, one of the things I tell them is take Israel out of the equation. If you have to make battle with these BDS idiots, then you listen to their language and use their words and their arguments to show what liars and hypocrites they are. And in this particular case, I went through the whole cycle, you know, Israel apartheid state, so I told him where there's apartheid against the Palestinians, for instance in Jordan, where they keep Palestinians, or people claim to be Palestinians in refugee camps, stateless for 70 years. That's true apartheid. Incidentally, ladies and gentlemen, you won't believe this, but under the full control of the Palestinian Authority, the full administrative and military security control of the Palestinian Authority, for 60 years or less, or about that sort of period, the Palestinian Authority have been keeping Palestinians in refugee camps, sponsored, funded operated by United Nations UNRWA. How can you be a Palestinian refugee when you're living under the control of the Palestinian Authority? And so it goes on. So that's why I wrote the book as BDS for Idiots, which is for students. It's a light read, but it's an education. It teaches a methodology. And on the back of the book, it says, I call it a seriously funny humiliation of BDS. We've seen this recently with the Eurovision, for instance. I have to talk on Australian radio on Friday about Eurovision and BDS. Then I was asked to write a series of articles a couple of years ago to celebrate the Balfour Declaration. And as I did the research for the Balfour Declaration, I knew about one other thing before I come on that. I did another book because part of my research about the pro-Palestinian activists, the anti-Israel activists, everywhere I looked, eventually, if you scratch the surface, what appears but anti-Semitism in every aspect, whether it's Hamas, oh Muslim, there's a Jew hiding behind me, come out and kill him. That's in the Hamas Charter. Don't say, oh Muslim, there's an Israeli, there's a Jew. The same with Mahmoud Abbas, with the Jews' filthy feet desecrating the Temple Mount, right? But everywhere you look, and we're seeing it these days because I've given talks about the Corbyn threat to Jews and Israel. In the Labour Party, what has emerged here is not only a hate Israel campaign, but a virulent, institutionalized anti-Semitism in the party that could become the next government of Great Britain. And this disease has leapt over the Atlantic to the Democratic Party. We're seeing the same phenomenon there. Fighting Hamas, BDS and anti-Semitism is the first definitive work written that actually exposes the anti-Semitism behind the Palestinian cause. But basically these are subjects for another talk, and I could talk about that for an hour and keep you in raptures. But coming back to the Balfour Declaration, the research I did went way beyond the connection between Weizmann and Balfour and Weizmann and the Zionist movement in Manchester. And I discovered that, in fact, 1917 was famous not only for the Balfour Declaration, but for a few other very significant events that affected whether we had a state or not. One or two of them I'm going to be addressing with regard to my book over here. But in the book, in the research I made, I read as much as I could. I went to archives, I spoke to people, I bought every book that was conceivable on the subject. And I made the book, actually, the extraordinary early struggles of Jewish and Christian heroes to establish the State of Israel. What I meant by that, in 1917, there were Palestinian Jews, including people like Jabotinsky, who was Russian, but became a Palestinian Jew, who I call the founder, basically, of the IDF. There were also other Palestinian Jews who, without them, we wouldn't have had a state. When I talk to groups, especially Christian groups, I pay my due respect to the fact that if it hadn't been two Christian Zionists who were heading the world at that stage, that was the British Prime Minister David Lloyd George and the Foreign Minister Balfour, it was also could have been inconceivable we wouldn't have had a state and the Balfour Declaration would have been applied. But I'm going to come on to another thing that's in my talk. I'm going to save it like this. There was a Palestinian Jew, a very important Palestinian Jew, who, if he had had his way, we would not have had a state today. So the research I did in this, however, fascinated me. Two characters fascinated me. One was a person called Aahronson from Zichron Yaakov, who is a remarkable character. There have been one or two sort of books written about him and making comparisons with him and Lawrence of Arabia and things like that, but nobody has really written a book that really traced his roots through his life, a remarkable life. Let me give you two examples and I'll come on to the thing. We talked about the Balfour Declaration. When the British cabinet was sitting to decide whether the Balfour Declaration would become British policy, waiting in 10 Downing Street in the anteroom was Chaim Weizmann. And the person that accompanied there wasn't one of the Manchester Zionists that helped draft the resolution. It was a Palestinian Jew from Zichron Yaakov, Aahronson. Here he is in Downing Street. When Lloyd George picked General Allenby to open the Palestine campaign and give a gift to the British people, take Jerusalem by Christmas, he was in the general staff in the Savoy Hotel, which we'll be coming to later in the program here, getting advice from all his generals how to win the third Battle of Gaza. The British had lost 2 battles of Gaza. And he was planning the third Battle of Gaza when a guy who was in British intelligence in Cairo at that time, a Palestinian Jew, said to the general, General Allenby, don't fight in Gaza, fight in Beersheba. He said, why should I fight in Beersheba? This Palestinian Jew said, because that's where the water is. He said, you're going into a battle campaign with 150,000 men, 10,000 horses and camels, motorized vehicles. If you don't run on water, you will lose the war. That man was Aahronson. So I started writing a book about him, in the normal form, a sort of documentary book, biography of sorts. And then I listened to my wife. Something that I do, she said, all too infrequently. And she said, and she's sitting over here, so she can tell you whether to tell the truth or not. You'll never make a fortune writing these books. Why don't you write a sloppy novel? A romance, like the type she wrote. And as I was writing, and I was doing my research, I decided, you know what? I'm going to concentrate on Sarah Aahronson. Now, there are lots of books written about Sarah Aahronson, but it left me very dissatisfied, because when the people are writing a biography or chronological order of her life, they go on known facts, and they miss out a lot of, which for me, as a storyteller, some of the essential ingredients. We're talking here about a young, beautiful girl who had, they said they had a love affair, a romance. What's a love affair and romance? What form did it take? I took the step that they did not dare to take, to describe her relationship with Avshalom Feinberg. They talked about the things she went through in her life in chronological order, but they didn't get into the kishkas of the character of the girl and the woman, and the stresses and the strains that this girl, this woman, must have gone through. And I wanted to put flesh and spirit and bones and feeling into the book. So I decided to do it as a form of a debut novel, because that would have me avoid any criticism. How do you know this happened and how do you know that happened? Chronologically, the places she went to, the things that happened, the things she saw are all true. But around that, I'm building the image of this girl. I needed help for that. So I went looking at books, and I went to Zichron Yaakov, and I found the people at the Aahronson Center very unfriendly, but I took whatever I could, whatever, and I kept looking. And then I came across Hillel Hauke, who had moved several decades ago to Zichron Yaakov. He came to Zichron Yaakov at a time before it was commercialized like it is today. It was virtually almost like you could feel Zichron Yaakov when he came over, from almost like the ghost of 100 years ago, where you had a lot of empty buildings, you had a lot of destroyed buildings, abandoned places, and he was a guy that went grubbing around. He wanted to find out what Zichron was like 100 years ago, what was going on there when things were happening with the Aaronsons or whatever. And he went into these buildings and grubbed around for all sorts of artifacts, for photographs, for documents. She got chatting with the people, and he found out there was an undercurrent going on in Zichron Yaakov 100 years ago, a gossipy town, some people with evil tongues and evil intent, and even parts of the Aahronson family there were one or two black sheep. And he wrote that in his book called A Strange Death. Strange Death was really referring to a couple of women who went, he called them sort of crazy, and died. One died naturally or seemingly naturally, another one died of maybe suicide or whatever. So I went frequently to meet with Hillel. He was very useful and very helpful to me, and he gave me ideas and things like that. He gave me pointers around Sipron Yaakov and other places, which helped me with the book. He also, by the way, is persona non grata at the Aahronson Centre across the road from Warrington, where he lives in Sipron Yaakov, because he did expose that one of the Aahronson family, the brother Alexander, was, I don't quite agree with his definition, but he had one or two dalliances with teenage girls in some field somewhere, or even in the cemetery, and for that reason, because it's in the book, his book, he's persona non grata there. So now we come on to my book. Now, I had a problem starting the book, because in the research that I got, there was a certain connection between Sir Aahronson and this guy to the left of the picture. Wait a minute, my pointer's not working. Never mind. Okay, here they go. They go on the left. That one. Does anybody know who he is? No? Okay. How about that one? Same guy. This is Lawrence, when he was a student from Oxford University, studying archaeology, a specific type of archaeology. He was studying the archaeology of Crusader fortresses as a military defense. This is his book, Crusader Castles. Now, there's theories that Lawrence had met Sarah while he was exploring not just in Syria, he came to northern Palestine and went to a lot of the Crusader ruins around the north of Palestine. And there's a suggestion that he didn't have any affair or anything like that, but he met her and knew of her, and later found out, because he was involved in British intelligence, the fact about the Nili spy network, he'd met later on Aaron Aahronson, and he knew about Sarah. Now this is all sort of, there was a lot of other factors. There was another guy who happened to be, during the First World War, over here, he was one of the guys in charge of the Megiddo prison. And he knew about the spy work and things like that, and he spoke to some of the prisoners. And he wrote some articles about Nili and Sarah Aahronson. And he recalls that after the war, he was at some petrol station in Devon, of course, I forgot where it is right now, filling up his car, and the guy rode up on a motorbike, and he happened to be Lawrence. And he said, "You're Captain Lawrence?" He said, "Yes." He said, "I wrote the articles about Sarah Aahronson." And according to what he said, Lawrence said to him, "Yes, I wrote about her also." What do you mean? In the 7 Pillars of Wisdom, if you look at the book, Lawrence's book, The 7 Pillars of Wisdom, he dedicated it to somebody called S.A. People think that this was one of his Arab boy servants when he was over the east of the River Jordan with Faisal, who had a similar name. But Lawrence had one of his best friends was the poet Rupert Graves. And Rupert Graves, people asked him, "Who was this S.A.?" And he wouldn't say who he was. But he let down a hint that S.A. is S is the name of somebody, and A is the location where they were. So people say it could be Sarah, A for Atlit, because that's where the Jewish research station was, at Atlit. But I started writing the book. I have a scene where it opens up with a scene of those. How many people have read the book so far? Hands up. 2, 3, 4.
No.
Okay. Starts with a scene with Sarah on the beach, on the seashore, after a day working at the Jewish agriculture station at Atlit. And then she rides and she sees this guy riding a bike. And she follows him on the horse, and he comes to this place, which is what's called Castle Pilgrim, or Chateau Pellegrin, which is the Crusader fortress on the Bay of Atlit. Their agricultural station was here, and this is the fortress. But I did this all research and writing, and then I scrapped it and put it away because it was really too flimsy. There was no hard evidence to back it up. But one of the things these days that upsets me is that if you go to Atlit, I don't know if you've gone on group tours or whatever, you can go to the detention camp there, correct? Anybody been to the detention camp in Atlit? Has anybody been to the Jewish agricultural station in Atlit? It's desolated, you couldn't get there, it's been destroyed, it's been dismantled and everything. I think it's a national crime, because this was the site of the first major center, espionage center, in warfare at the time of the Turks and the Germans that was being read by the Aahronson, and that is an integral part of pre-state history. Now I tried to find out why they've let it go to decay. And the only answer that's feasible, some people, because I've got connections in strategic studies and national security and everything, said the reason that it's left to decay is because of this place over here. Because this place today is being operated by special elite units of the IDF, naval units or whatever, and they don't want tourists and people coming around that part of the coast, so they've let it decay, which is a shame, because I think they should resurrect it. Now, as I write the book, I write the story of this young, precocious, attractive girl having a romance, a love affair, as they say, with Aahronson Feinberg. Good-looking guy, romantic sort of figure, well-educated, bit of an adventurer, swashbuckler and everything, who joined Aaronson's Jewish Agricultural Research Station to help with the agricultural development and get involved. And therefore he met Sarah, and they had a love affair. I describe a love affair like no other book written about Sarah Aahronson. Some people have called my book the sexiest Jewish book ever. This was Aahronson as well.
Aahronson.
Sorry, Aahronson Feinberg, correct, yeah. What happened in this love affair? Fell in love with her. She liked him a lot. They asked to marry her. She said no. She said no because it was too early for her. She was, since childhood basically, she was in awe of her brother, who had led from teenage years and upwards a most remarkable life as an agronomist of all people. He, even in his early 20s, was in connection with a lot of scientists in Germany and in other places. And in Germany, they said, we need to find a certain kind of wild wheat, because this is the sturdy wheat we know for mass production for bread and livestock food. Aahronson knew the land of Palestine from the top to the bottom, as I described in the book, like a lover knows the body of his lady lover. Every nook and cranny. He went in search of this wild wheat. In a lot of cases, Sarah joined him. What Sarah was doing as well is her brother was educating her that in the coastal plain between Zichron Yaakov and Caesarea, which was barren and malarial swamp, in the Bible it was a place really full of milk and honey. A lot of vegetarian, but it had gone to rack and ruin by the Romans and other conquerors and also the Ottoman Turks. But he knew he could be resurrected. So they went looking for plants and things like this. And Sarah was one of those, together with her sister Rivka, who decided to give these plants not just Latin names, but the Hebrew equivalents. And Sarah Aahronson was in contact with Ben Yehuda, the father of the modern Hebrew language, and suggested words for these various plants, which he adopted. So she was absolutely in awe of her older brother, and he knew there was a career going on here. In short, he found this wild wheat at the foothills of Mount Hermon. And all the world started applauding him, this agronomist, for a remarkable find. And he was invited to go to America. And he met the American Minister of Agriculture, and he met also people, mainly Jewish people, who helped fund his Jewish agricultural research station in Atlin. That's what it looked like then, with the entrance with these poplar trees and the buildings in here. So what happened with this love affair with Avshalom? Sarah said, no, there's more I want to do in life. I need time to develop myself, to help my brother, to help develop the agricultural station, whatever. And Avshalom, being sort of headstrong and disappointed, was bitterly disappointed. And because he'd been rejected, this is, by the way, the photo of the agricultural station, the accommodation and everything that they had there. He took up with Sarah's younger sister, Rivka, who instantly fell in love with him, this swashbuckling, good-looking guy. So he proposed to her. In the meantime, the Aahronσons had had a visitor of a fairly successful Jewish-German businessman who had been in Zichron, had been invited to their home, had dinner with them, and had taken with Sarah. But being a strict conformist, he had a chat with Sarah's father and said, is Sarah taken up with anybody? And he said, no. He said, well, if she would have me, I would like to have her as my wife. So what did Sarah do? She married him. Basically, out of the disappointment of finding that her boyfriend hadn't waited for her, but had taken up with Rivka. How did she discover it? This is why I talk about getting into the kishkis of the girl, of the woman. What made her go from being dedicated to her brother and everything they were doing in Zichron Yaakov and Atlin, and taking up with a German businessman, a Jewish German businessman, who was resident in Constantinople? It was the fact that she discovered that Avshalom had written the sister, Rivka, a romantic poem called, in Hebrew, Elef Nishikot, a song composed from these words by Tzvi Kapik and became an instant hit when sung by Yoram Gaon. Elef Nishikot, da 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 da. You know the song?
Yes.
Right. This was a pill she couldn't take. She discovered this poem, Elef Nishikot, to her sister. She decided to get married and go and move to Constantinople. This is a picture of Constantinople in 1915. Now, her husband was a successful businessman, but a conformist and a stickler. He took his wife there. They had a house not too far from the port. And he was away all day, either at business or he did a lot of traveling. He was constantly traveling between Constantinople and Berlin. And she, out of sheer boredom, decided to, free-spirited girl, to go out and travel around, to walk to the port, to see the hustle and bustle of what was going on. At this time, the First World War had begun, and there was a lot of movements there. And when she came home, and she told her husband she'd been to the port, he was in total shock. My wife, the wife of a respected businessman here, will not be seen sauntering around on her own through the streets of Constantinople with the dockers and the porters and the workers. You do not do this. So she felt herself housebound. He gave her a party. He helped her introduce her to some of the ladies there. And there was some Jewish community, both of people who came into Constantinople because their husbands were doctors or professional people or at the university, or also people coming from Palestine who were there. And so, without any other choice, she went out for tea or coffee or whatever during the day. And part of the research I did was, knowing some of the places she went to, I did the investigation of what the character of these places. The Grand Hotel Turkey was one of the places she really preferred to be, because from the window of the lounge over there, she could look at the boats and everything and dream of home. But when that wasn't available, they went to the Hotel Turkey on the Grand Rue de Pera. Now this is what it looks like inside, even at that time. You can see she knew her way around with her friends, but that was about as far as she was able to go. And she felt very restricted. One of the meetings, or the house events that her husband had organized, two of the guests were these two gentlemen. Anybody can guess who they were? These fine Turkish-looking gentlemen. On the left here, in the fez, and the suit, and the Turkish moustache, is David Ben-Gurion, studying law in Constantinople. This gentleman, Yitzhak Ben-Zvi, Israel's first president. Wherever David Ben-Gurion went, Yitzhak Ben-Zvi went. They were studying law, they spoke perfect Turkish, and they were studying law then when Sarah Aahronson was there. Let me tell you a story right now about David Ben-Gurion in particular. He was the person that almost lost us the state of Israel. How did he do that? Because he left Constantinople in late 1915 to come back here. He was with the Zionists. But he knew he had to tread on broken glass as far as the Turks were concerned. Don't forget at that time, we're not talking about the benevolent Sultan letting the place run to decay. By that time, the Turks were the three pashas, the young Turks, who were driving Turkey to war, were everywhere. And the guy in charge of Palestine was a guy called Jamal Pasha, a brute of a guy. Palestine, Turkish Palestine at that time, was Syria, Lebanon, the all of Palestine that we know today is Israel, and east of the River Jordan, down to Medina on the Red Sea, and down to the borders with Egypt. But what Ben-Gurion did, in order to try and keep developing Zionism until a time that would be right for a state, was that he went to Jamal Pasha and he offered that he would recruit the Palestinian Jews to fight for the Turkish army. The British weren't in the war at that time. Think about it for a second. David Ben-Gurion offered the Palestinian Jews to Jamal Pasha to fight for the Turks. If Jamal Pasha had accepted that, the Balfour Declaration would have been torn up. We would maybe never had a state. A miracle happened. A miracle happened. Jamal Pasha and the Turks were actually conscripting Jews and Arabs, dragging them off the street to go in the Turkish army. But when Ben-Gurion went to him to offer the Palestinian Jews, he said no. If you want to see a modern miracle in our time say 100 years ago, that was it. And for his pain, because he was a Zionist, Jamal Pasha deported Ben-Gurion and Ben-Zvi, put them on a ship in Jaffa, with another 8,000 Jews and shipped them off to a refugee camp in Egypt. While Sarah was in Constantinople, meeting her lady friends, Jewish lady friends, some from Palestine or not, she met this lady, Mania Shokat, who had also been exiled from Palestine for being an active Zionist. She was in charge of Kibbutz Sejera up in the north. And she was a woman after Sarah's heart. Because I'm not kibbutz. She said, the women aren't just going to work in the kitchens and mopping up the floors in the toilets and everything. We're going to be working in the fields. We're going to do the shmirah, the guard duty at night. We're going to ride horses. We're going to learn how to shoot. The women can do what the men can do. Sarah fell in love with her. She had been deported because of her Zionist activism. Funny enough, this lady in charge of the kibbutz stood up to David Ben-Gurion because, as she told Sarah, David Ben-Gurion came up to come join the kibbutz. He was there for about a year as like an outsider doing some of the work. But he wanted to be part of the secretariat, to be in charge of the kibbutz. After a year, she said, no, you and Itzhak Ben-Zvi can carry on doing the works in the field. You don't take over from me. So he left the kibbutz. This is a strong-headed woman. Sarah not only was entranced by her, it reawoken in her the feeling that she had to be back home. Added to that, with the war on, she was getting less and less correspondence from home. Not from Aaron, not from anybody else. She didn't know what was happening. She wasn't getting any communication. She was missing it. She was in a loveless marriage where her husband was going off, being very busy, doing very well, going between Berlin, doing the business, coming back to Constantinople, doing contracts and business with the Turkish government and the administration, and going backwards and forward, and she was left basically on her own. An emissary, she was told, was coming over in order to ask for a hearing to have Mania and her husband allowed to be repatriated back to Palestine. The guy came over, and Sarah said, when he's over here, I want to meet with him. Bring him over, let him have dinner here, I want to meet with him. He came over, they had the hearing, they were brought to her house in Constantinople. And this emissary, Joshua House, had failed in his mission to allow Mania and her husband to come back to Palestine. And Sarah said to me, when are you going back? He said, I'm going back, I have to go back in about a week. She said, take me with you. Take me with you. Okay, because travel at those days, woman on her own, is impossible. Absolutely impossible. Not just a question of a plane or a boat. It was a torturous journey. In fact, the chapters on the journey take up a couple of chapters in the book. And he agreed. Her husband was away. She went to apply for an exit visa and a passport in Constantinople. It took almost a week to come. She got it in time. She left a note for her husband, and together with Joshua House, she departed. The Hardapasa train station is still there in Istanbul today. It's on the waters of the Bosphorus, but it's a train station. Look at it, it's magnificent. This is the inside. It was built by the Germans, two German architects. It was part of the Berlin-Baghdad Railway, which was being constructed by the German government as part of the German Empire in cooperation with the Turks, who were cooperating with them in the war. And it was still under construction. This actually happened. This in 2010, the same building, they had a fire. This is it. This is part of the work that I did, the Berlin-Baghdad Express. Now, she took that journey. She left this magnificent train station And the train took her out of Turkey into part of Syria, and her journey became a nightmare. First of all, there wasn't any continual trains because the trains, the preference we were given at the time for the troop movements, the equipment, and the ammunitions. So on single track railways, passengers had to wait in certain way stations, wait in hotels or places where they could stay until the passenger trains were allowed through. And there were certain sections where there weren't any lines, so they had to take carts and carriages to get from one place to the other. That wasn't the hard part of her journey. This was part of the Berlin, all the way through Turkey, through Syria to Adana, going here all the way eventually to Basra. And she was taking the place over here to Adana, and then down to Damascus, and then down here to Semah on the Sea of Galilee, then to Haifa. But this was the road she was taking over here. So you can see I'm doing it. As she was traveling, both on the train and also from the cart, she began to see crowds of people, poor people, being marched through nowhere. For what? They were carted in as well. They were Armenian Christians who had been taken out by force from their homes in order to be transported or marched up to the northwest part of Syria and left to die. No medical, no tents, no food, nothing. Left to die. This was the Armenian genocide. So she saw. This and worse are described in my book. She arrived in the Konya train station. They got a place because they had to wait a couple of days, 2 or 3 days, to get transportation. The guy in the hotel, they asked, what's going on here? And they said, these are the Armenians. And they saw kids with the children here. Yes, they're orphans. There's an American orphanage, an American hospital, run by some American nurse, and they're taking some of these kids in. So they went over there to meet the people. These are some of the kids, the orphan kids. And they met these two people. Armigan Agassian, who was an Armenian professor, and the American nurse, Emma Cushman, with Armenian orphans. Well, they continued on their journey. She told Joshua, what the Turks are doing to the Armenian Christians, they can do to us. This is Jamal Pasha in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount. This is Jamal Pasha with Sheikh Hussein of Mecca, the father of Faisal and Abdullah. This was before the Arab Revolt. This was actually before Hussein decided to take up an Arab revolt against the Turks. So now we have Sarah coming back, having seen this. She arrives back. She meets, Aaron's there to meet with her. She wants to know what's happened. He tells her this. The year before, the whole of Palestine had experienced a plague of locusts that were biblical in proportion. The locusts came out of the Sinai and came out of Egypt, decimated everything, every blade of grass, even killed livestock. People died of starvation here in Palestine. Alex, her brother, and Rivka weren't here. Aaron had ordered them to leave because of certain activities that Alexander had been going under, and sent them off via Beirut on a boat to America, where Alexander could keep contact with the donors of the agricultural research station. What had happened there was that during this leg of focus, Jamal Pasha had called Aahronson to a meeting and demanded that he do something with his research to put an end to this plague of locusts. But what had happened in the meantime is an argument had taken place in Athlid and also Zichron Yaakov between Aahronson, Avshalom Feinberg, Joseph Lishansky, because Joseph and Avshalom, swashbuckling characters, they had a militia group, if you like, to protect the property of the people or the farmers of Zichron Yaakov against the Arabs who were coming to steal the stuff, and steal the livestock, and steal the equipment. And they wanted to use their weapons as a sort of a resistance against the Turks as the war was beginning, as a way to encourage the British and the others to come in and take over Palestine. But Aaron had a calmer head on his shoulder. He said a small group of fighters with a few rifles would soon be overpowered by the Ottoman Turks and the Germans. They have no chance at all. But what he suggested they do is they had a widespread agricultural network. And he said the time will come that whoever comes, whether it's the British or whatever, will need intelligence that we can give them. So when he met Jamal Pasha, he made a deal with him. He said, I will help you, we will help you solve your locust problem, but we need special permits to travel around freely, me and my team, wherever they are, to go wherever's necessary, including into Turkish and German facilities and whatever, in order to try and solve the problem. Jamal Pasha agreed. He was heading his own operation. But where was Avshalom? He said that Alexander had gone down to Egypt in order to try and meet up with the British General Staff in Cairo, to tell them they have an espionage network ready to help the British, and the British had sent Alexander back and said, what are you talking about? We don't even have a Palestine campaign. Go away. Don't leave us. We're just a protectorate in Egypt. But Avshalom had begged Aaron to let him go down, and he went down there. And he met somebody in the British Naval Intelligence who was open to the idea. In fact, they provided a frigate, and he brought Avshalom back. And the frigate put him off on the Bay of Athlid so he could show them where it was, and a boat came and took him ashore, and they established contact with the British. And that ship began to come, and they began to give it much information that the British wanted. And one day, the ship stopped coming. They had all this information, all this intelligence, important stuff, but the British wasn't there. So Avshalom said, I'm going to go down to Egypt again. I'll take another guy who's in charge, Joseph Lishansky. We'll go down to Egypt. So they went. So when Sarah came, he found that Alexander Rivka's not there. Former lover, was going his way down to Egypt with Lishansky, and Aaron was there on his own, running things. He got a letter, by the way, from Sarah's husband, demanding that he send her back. Sarah refused. Said, my place is here with you. I am not leaving. He wanted her then to leave and go to America. No, I'm staying here. And so she stayed to help him out. One day, Lishansky turned up and gave the news that Avshalom Feinberg had been captured by the Turkish soldiers near the Egyptian border, and that he'd been escorted to a prison in Beersheba, where he'd been charged with espionage, and the Turks were waiting for the order to execute him. Lyshansky had ridden from Beersheba to Zichron Yaakov with hardly any pause in order to carry this news. Joseph had, before he'd left, had raised some money as a bakshish, as a bribe, the governor of the prison, not to take any steps until he returned or received an order from Jamal Pasha himself to release Avshalom Feinberg. The excuse they gave at the time, nothing espionage, we were there doing the necessary work ordered to us by Jamal Pasha on the locusts. Aaron demanded a meeting with Jamal Pasha and went to meet with him. And using forceful diplomacy, with a touch of Jewish chutzpah, you could say, he left the Jamal Pasha, the Turk, with little option but to order Feinberg's release. He said, without him, I can't complete the locust project, so release him, send down the order. Jamal Pasha gave the order, Feinberg came back. After a while, the ship still didn't come. And Aahronson came up with an audacious plan. He called him to a meeting in his study in Zichron Yaakov. And he said, I'm telling you this, but this has to remain a secret. I've determined that I am going to head for London. I'm going to go to London. I'm going to bang on doors of the British government until somebody takes us seriously. The story of how he went from Zichron to London is an amazing story. I'm not going into detail here. You have to wait for my next book or study yourself. However, he decided to take a person that Sarah didn't know, a guy called Lova from Hadera, who had been part of the agricultural team. And to do it, he went back to Jamal Pasha with a complete report that they had done on the locusts. He said, because you saved my guy, here's your report. He said, furthermore, I've been invited to go to Berlin, to the scientists there that I know, my colleagues over there, in order to study a new form of corn that produced more oil, which would be good for human and animal livestock. But from there, he said, I want to go to America, where they've been conducting research on locust and pest information. And also, I need to be there to meet my donors to get more money. But I need a special pass. And Jamal Pasha gave it to him. And he went back and said, I'm leaving. Under no circumstances does anybody must know that I'm heading to London. The story of how he arrived in London is amazing. Amazing. This is why the next book that I write about Aahronson, he will take a form of almost like a James Bond, if you like. Incredible story. So they went. Led them to total secrecy, because if the Turks learned that he was there with the British, they would execute everybody. No one knew better than Sarah, having seen what they did with the Armenians. Aaron instructed Sarah to help Avshalom recruit and train new members of the intelligence team. And he demanded of all of them there, no adventurism, no risk-taking, because espionage in enemy territory would be a deadly mission, and any slip-up would result in death. Sarah threw herself into the job, into the espionage scene. Aaron went. She was doing the agricultural work. She was getting the information. She was working like 24 hours a day at night. She was putting the messages in code in order to send them off. She recruited people like Eitan Belkin was recruited by Avshalom. This Eitan, for instance, was infiltrated himself into the Turkish army headquarters and was assigned to the headquarters of Kemal Pasha and witnessed the burning of 500 Armenians. Another one was up in Beirut, where he reported in the First World War on German submarines coming in and out of Beirut port. Eitan's brother, Nachman, had both Jewish and Turkish friends in Beersheba and brought him invaluable information because some of them worked inside the signals office of the Turkish headquarters in Beersheba, bringing back the signals about troop movements. There was an awkward relationship, of course, between Sarah and Avshalom. Rivka was in America, but somehow she seemed to be there sort of between them. And Avshalom explained that really he always felt for Sarah. But Sarah rejected him. That conversation needed to be resolved, but they were too busy. One day, Reuven Schwartz, a neighbor with one of the team, arrived at Atlid, and he was surprised to find something fluttering on one of the plows. And he found a note pinned to it, and it was a message in code, and they had to wait for Avshalom to come to decipher it. And the message was from the British Naval Intelligence, saying, "Business to resume shortly, have goods ready." Somehow during the night, the ship had arrived, nobody in there, they put on a boat, somebody from the ship had run to the station, pinned a note, gone back on the boat, and they'd gone. There were huge celebrations and relief. Somehow, connections had been restored. Maybe it was Aaron, who knows, whatever, they didn't know. But the connection with the British had been restored again. They were rushed to get the information to see what can happen. In one of the next trips, they heard a rumor that the British Prime Minister, Lord George, was pushing to open up a new front in Palestine. So they worked with even greater endeavor to bring them whatever information they had. And this atmosphere, the relationship between Sarah and Avshalom became, shall we say, a bit more relaxed and intimate. But suddenly, once again, the ship stopped coming. And where was Aaron? Days and nights went by. Nothing, no contact from the Brits or from Aaron. And the joy they had led to despair and desperation. After a while, Avshalom decided that he was going to trek down to Egypt. Sarah said no. Bitter argument. He won. He said, "I'm going to take him to Chansky. I've been there before. Yes, I got arrested. This time it'll be fine. I'm going." She couldn't dissuade him. And as he mounted his horse in Atlid, Sarah gave him a parting gift, basically to show her love for him. A packet of sweet dates. She made a condition not to eat the dates until he reached Egypt. And with a kiss, he was gone. As I write in the book, it was the beginning of 2017, and a sad way to begin what was to become a dramatic and fateful year. Sarah was now left alone to manage not only the agricultural project, but the espionage ring. Only father was at home, and he was deliberately not informed of anything that was going on. Somewhere, Aaron was somewhere, maybe London, don't know. Avshalom making his way south. One stormy January morning, a drenched stranger arrived at Atlid. He introduced himself as Lover, the guy who had left with Aaron. She allowed him to change of clothes, to have a shower, gave him a meal. And over that meal, he told her a very searing story. They'd traveled together to Constantinople, him and Aaron. And in Constantinople, Aaron had been unable to get a travel pass for Lova. And he said, "You stay in Constantinople. I'm going to head for Berlin. I'm going to meet up with Avshalom's sister, Sila, who was a student in Berlin. And when I get a travel pass or get some information, I'll get it to pass it to you. So my message would reach you, stay here. Let me tell you how loyal this lover was. He stayed until his money ran out. He went on the street selling matches to try and make money. He was starving, and yet he wouldn't leave. He was waiting for Aaron. By sheer coincidence, while he was begging on the street, a Dr. Arthur Rupin, another Palestinian Jew, another agronomist, passed by and recognized him. Lover told him his story. He said, I have to come back. I need to stay here, but maybe they know back in Zichron or Atlid what has happened. Arthur Rupin took him in. I don't know why he's going on to there. He took him in, gave him a suit, paid for his transport. He said, you will escort a German officer who has to go to Palestine. I'll give you the information about forestation. You are one of my people in forestation, that's your story. In short, he took the train back to Haifa, and he walked from Haifa during a stormy night to Atlid, where he arrived. The next morning, he told Sarah he wants to go and say hello to his family in Hadera. She arranged a ride for him to Hadera, and he returned 4 days later. And he gave her a piece of paper, and she recognized Avshalom's handwriting. He had written in the past a poem, her old ex-lover, that began to Lova, out of sheer friendship. This was a guy who was so loyal that she welcomed him into the team. The story of Aaron's journey, as I said, is amazing. Unbeknown to Sarah, Aaron had reached London, told his story, and had been co-opted by British intelligence to the Arab Bureau of the General Staff in Egypt, working out of the Savoy Hotel. This is where he was officer. While he was there, he went in search of Avshalom's friend, Lieutenant Woolley. He was the one who had initiated the original ship that brought Avshalom back to Atlid. Now, what's the connection between Lawrence of Arabia and Woolley? There's Lawrence, there's Woolley. Archaeologist up in Syria, looking at the excavations of Karkemish in northern Syria. They were also doing intelligence work, monitoring the Berlin-Baghdad railway construction. He didn't find Woolley. Instead, he met somebody called Captain Lewin Weldon, who told Aaron that Woolley's ship had been sunk by a Turkish warship off the coast of Lebanon. And Woolley had survived, but had been taken prisoner. That was why the ship failed to arrive at Atlid. They requisitioned another vessel, and they succeeded in getting one. And Aaron traveled back to it to show them where Atlid was. But Aaron was given strict instruction he could not leave that ship. He was too valuable for British intelligence. On a damp February day, Reuven Schwartz came rushing to announce there was a ship maneuvering off the Atlid coast, and they signaled to it, and they re-established contact again. There's another dramatic chapter in my book. Lover made it to the ship. He left Zichron, he left Atlid, he got on the ship. He also had a Bible with him, which was Feinberg's Bible. Aaron was livid to learn that Avshalom and Lashansky had left to go down to Egypt, had risked all to do it. But what had happened to them? When he got back to Egypt, Aaron Aahronson was told there was a Palestinian Jew in a hospital in Alexandria, and he rushed there to find an injured Lishansky lying in hospital bed. Leginsky told him that Avshalom had been killed. They had come across some Turks, there had been a gun battle, he had made an escape, and Avshalom had been killed. He was fuming, but he ordered him back to Atlid and made him swear that he wouldn't mention it to Sarah, because if he did, he was afraid that she would break down and lose control completely and they would lose everything. Tell him instead that he'd gone to England to learn to fly with the British Air Force so he could come back as a pilot and be one of the first pilots for a future state. They were also training carrier pigeons to add communications, because communications kept breaking down between the ship and there. He returned, but he didn't keep his promise. He broke the news to Sarah that Avshalom was dead. She went into deep depression. She still had to carry on the work, both the agricultural work and the espionage work. But he also had a friend. Avshalom had a friend. Naaman Belkin was a close friend, and he kept coming and pestering, where's Avshalom? If Lishansky's back, where is Avshalom? And Sarah had to make up excuses, lying deliberately, something she never did with any of the crew. Problem with the ship again. She went around recruiting spies all over the place. The incredible information they brought the British was amazing. Aaron in Egypt, Avshalom death. All the pressures, including a petulant Nachman, were getting to Sarah. She was also getting problems from Zichron, from the Council of Zichron, who knew she was doing clandestine work and were ordering her to stop because they felt it was endangering the people in Zichron if they ever found out. She was also getting pressure from the Zionist Central Council in Tel Aviv, who were fed up of the Aahronson receiving money from America that they felt should come to them for their Zionist endeavors and not for the Aaronsons and their agricultural research. They were getting pressure from the Shomer Defense Group in the north, who didn't like any competition. All these pressures on the head of this 26-year-old girl. And the ship stopped coming again. And then she got news that the Turks were now forcibly evicting the Jews of Jaffa and Tel Aviv. They ordered them to leave immediately. If they had carriages, take carriages. If they can't, walk. Walk up Palestine to the north of Palestine, turn east and head into northern Syria. And Sarah knew exactly what was going on. This was the start of the genocide of the Jews of Palestine. The ship wasn't coming, but she had to give messages to the British and to her brother, and she did it with the carrier pigeons. She sent out the messages telling what was happening, including the murder of Jews in Jaffa who were being hanged from trees. She was the one that sent the message via Aaron, who sent it not only to the British in Whitehall, but also to the Americans as well. And the word got out. Fortunate Aaron Aahronson had some friends in high places in America. And the Americans, who were neutral in this war, weren't involved in the war, put pressure on the German government, stop what these Turks are doing in Palestine immediately. Because if Jamal Pasha carries on persecuting the Jews, this will bring America into the war, and we don't want to do that. That order arrived just in time. Why? Because Jamal Pasha had the plan to do in Jerusalem what he'd done in Tel Aviv and Jaffa. And that is the plan to deport the Jews out of Jerusalem, to make them walk down into towards the Dead Sea and the Jordan Valley, make a left turn, and head up there into Syria, to die in the fields of northern Syria. Sarah's words when she was coming home with Joshua House were coming true here in Palestine. This was going to be the first Holocaust of the Jews following the Armenian genocide. The pebble thrown out by Sarah Aahronson about the fate of the people were spread around the world. Aaron invited Sarah to come to Egypt. She went. He begged her to stay because he realized things were getting dangerous. She refused. This was Lova. While they were there, when Aaron was busy during the day, he usually escorted Sarah out in the evening to dine in some of the restaurants, to meet some of the people in the British military intelligence that he was working with and everything. She was a head turner. But during the day, she was free. And Lova and Joseph Lashansky were escorting her around and whatever. And a love affair developed between Lova and Sarah. Again, he wanted her to stay, but she wouldn't. She insisted on going back. This was the ship they were providing, the Manigam. Had the carrier pigeons with them and everything. The intelligence increased massively. When the ship didn't come, they used the pigeons. Then news came that Nachman Belkin had been arrested while he was making his way down to Egypt. He had been unsettled and unhappy and didn't believe what Sarah had said about the fate of Absalom, and he determined to go down by himself to Egypt to find out for himself. And he had been captured by the Turks. And the German general Kressenstein wanted him hanged. Wyshansky went in search of money to pay another bribe to the people over there. Planned a rescue mission with Eitan, Nachman's brother, to try and save him, because word was getting out that they were torturing Nachman for information. Sarah sent a coded message by carrier pigeon to her brother, in which she wrote the final line: Nachman may not be the final sacrifice. The ship must come, or we are doomed. If you want to know what happens, you have to read by the book, or you have to get me to come back and continue the talk some other time. Thank you very much.
I have read the book.
Any questions? I'll tell you anything you want to know about except the end of it. But I have it on good authority from people who have read it that the best part is what comes next. Thank you. Barry.
So the role of the Germans with the Americans in protecting the Jews, did it take the Americans to pressure on the Germans, or were the Germans willing to do that?
No. At that time, because Aaron knew some people who actually, one or two of them, had actually been visited him in Zichron Yaakov. And the American government put pressure on the Germans and told them that the Turks had to stop. They'd already had rumors about the Armenian genocide. Now they were getting stories that the genocide was starting at the Palestinian Jews. And the Germans didn't want the Americans coming into the war. They wouldn't come on the German side, they'd come on the British side. And so the message got through from Berlin to the Germans here in Palestine, and they put pressure on Jamal Pasha to back off and not to do the same in Jerusalem that he'd done in Tel Aviv. By the way, Zichron Yaakov was one of the places that took in a number of these people who had been deported from Tel Aviv. Jewish settlements on the way took in as many as they could, but there were about 11,000 people that had been deported at that time. There was a couple of the ships that had been deported to Egypt, to refugee camps. There were refugee camps prior to that, in 1911, that were in Egypt. Palestinian Jews in refugee camps. So, well, that's where, for instance, Jabotinsky found them and started recruiting them. That's why I said Jabotinsky was basically the founder of the IDF. Because Jabotinsky, as you can read in 1917, From Palestine to the Land of Israel, was second in command to the British officer John Patterson, Christian officer, who became a Christian Zionist. And this was really the first military action taken by Palestinian Jews as a first step to helping liberate Palestine, and they fought alongside the British against the Turks and the Germans later on in the Palestine campaign as well. That's it. Thank you very much. If you're